By
Yeah.
the time I got into Middle Eastern dance, I had been dancing a long time professionally in New York. I had a career, as you mentioned, in your introduction. Thank you for reading all of that. Um, I was really working toward becoming, as much as I could possibly be, a choreographer of significance in New York, and it was going pretty well. Um, and then I got terribly injured when I was 28 and had been therefore dancing professionally in the city for, almost a decade. Um, and then began the search, as is often, it's true for many people. The search usually begins when things fall apart. So I kept doing as much as I could do. I couldn't perform very well. I could teach. I had university teaching positions, and I kept doing that. But in my search for what could I do, somebody took me to a class by one of Adnan Sarhan's students, and I fell in love with it. And then Adnan came through New York at Christmas that year, and I went to one of his workshops. And then one of the first things we did was a Sufi whirling, but we also did all these other movement things and exercises that were sort of, just exercises really. And it was a huge group, like 200 people in this room, and music was Persian and Arabic. And I recognized the nature of a learning environment, teacher, students, but in every other way, it was so different. You close your eyes when the music was playing and you were moving. He'd lead for a little while, so there was no like do this combination and then you do it, repeat it back. No, he would sort of sit and lead and do these slow, beautiful movements, and then he'd say, "Close your eyes," and I'd sink into this very deep inner state, and I'd be in another world. And the music was often Persian or Arabic. So that was how I came into movement and Middle Eastern music, and of course he's a Sufi master. So my initial connection to this entire culture was through Sufi. It was only after studying with him for a few years that I got the notion that, I could perform this in nightclubs. And then I went and took classes and learned, the things you need to know to be a performer. Obviously, I was already a very adept dancer, so it didn't take me very long to understand how to put a show together. And, I could look a little bit like a belly dancer pretty quickly. And luckily for me, I danced in Anahit's company for a while, so I was dancing in more formal, structure in the theater and choreographies. So that kind of helped take off some of my rough edges. But, I really looked like a modern dancer trying to do a form. And it took years and years and years, really, for me to let go and to have the dance come from where it comes from. If you were maybe born in Egypt or you were born in, a country where it's native to you, that music and movement. But it was okay. I was always very competent as a dancer, so I could, as I said, look pretty close to it. But the main thing for me was I was all this time working with Adnan, and I was working with him a lot. So even though I was still teaching at universities during the year, I would spend my summers at this camp in New Mexico up in the mountains, and all day long we were doing Sufi work, which did not mean praying and thinking about things. It really was exclusively moving and breathing and maybe some chanting and dancing. And he was an amazing drummer in this sort of deep kind of way. It wasn't like club drumming on the side. It was, he'd play it in Iraqi style, or like the Marsh Arabs, really. And it was all about letting go of the top layer of the self and moving into an interiority. So for me, that's how I was doing Middle Eastern dance. I was doing it as a meditation, as a communion, really, and as a way of letting go of my constructed self, whatever I had constructed as a personality, as a dancer, and So then during the year, I would go back and teach, and then I would perform in nightclubs and this and that. But the underbelly of it, the primary driving force, was this mystical connection. I think that probably helped me just in terms of acceptance by the owners and the customers of the nightclubs and the musicians even. It helped me be accepted by them, because in a way I was in some different place with the dance. Maybe I wasn't understanding, exactly where to, do the little developments in the drum solo or something, but I was in the spirit of something that was, perceptible. I don't know really. I'm just speculating what they really thought. And anyway, I had a wonderful time, and people were very kind, and I had just a terrific performing period of doing Middle Eastern dance. And there were a lot of nightclubs in New York at that time, a lot of Turkish clubs, which I gravitated towards. I was doing more Turkish style dance than Arabic. And I was taken under the wing of a great Romani clarinet player who was celebrated, and when he came to town from Istanbul, and he liked me, and so every time he played a wedding or a party, he'd take me as the dancer. So I really had that wonderful feeling, and I'm sure many people understand this, of being a guest in the most wonderful way, drawn into an intimate environment, there in the music and the dance. So it was a wonderful time for me. I really loved it. I love the memory of it tremendously.